Evening at an upscale restaurant in downtown Boston, filled with the sound of laughter and conversation. Suddenly, glass shattered. Two heavily tattooed men burst through the door shouting, "Give us your wallets now!" People panicked and dove under tables. One man in a simple gray shirt, holding his young daughter close, calmly set her down on a chair. "Close your eyes, Lily." Then he stood up. In just 6 seconds, a sweep of his hand, a precise knee strike, both attackers lay unconscious on the floor. Everyone froze in stunned silence. A trembling waiter asked, "Who are you?" He replied quietly, "Just a father who learned to protect others before protecting his own child." But that night, everyone knew he was no ordinary man. Ethan Cole was 39 years old, a former Navy SEAL who'd left service after a failed rescue mission that still haunted his dreams. He now worked as a civil engineer, a quiet job that required precision, but kept him far from the chaos and violence of his past life. His daughter Lily, 8 years old and sharp as a tack, constantly told anyone who'd listen that her daddy was her hero, though she had no idea just how true that was. Ethan had been discharged 5 years ago after an operation went catastrophically wrong, an extraction that was supposed to be routine, but ended with teammates dead and survivors carrying guilt that no amount of therapy could fully erase. He'd walked away from the SEALs, from the Brotherhood and the missions, choosing instead to focus entirely on raising Lily after her mother had left when she was just 2 years old. People in their neighborhood knew him as the quiet single dad who worked construction projects, always polite but never social, keeping to himself and his daughter. Tonight was Lily's 8th birthday, and she'd begged to eat at a fancy restaurant like she'd seen in movies, the kind with cloth napkins and waiters in bow ties. Ethan had borrowed his emergency credit card, put on his only dress shirt that still fit, and taken his daughter out for the special evening she'd been dreaming about for weeks. They sat near the window, Lily bouncing with excitement as they ordered pizza despite the upscale menu because that was her favorite food and birthdays meant getting exactly what you wanted. At a corner table across the room, Clara Voss, a 31-year-old CEO of a rapidly growing cybersecurity company, was having an intense meeting with potential investors. Her eyes were glued to her laptop screen, running through financial projections and security protocols, completely absorbed in the high-stakes negotiation happening across the video call. She barely noticed the other diners, her focus locked on the numbers and contracts that could make or break her company's next phase of growth. Without warning, the restaurant's front door exploded inward as 2 men charged through, one waving what looked like a gun, the other brandishing a large knife. "Nobody moves or we start shooting!" the first attacker yelled, his voice cracking with either drugs or adrenaline or both. The second man grabbed wallets from the nearest table, shoving a waitress hard against the wall when she didn't move fast enough. Customers screamed and scrambled for cover, the pleasant dinner atmosphere shattering into pure terror. Lily grabbed her father's hand, her eyes wide with fear she'd never experienced before. Ethan's entire demeanor changed in an instant, years of training overriding the civilian identity he'd carefully constructed. "Look at me, baby," he said quietly, his voice carrying absolute calm that somehow cut through her panic. "Just look at Daddy, okay? Everything's going to be fine." He stood up slowly, deliberately, drawing the attention of the attackers as he moved with controlled precision toward them. The knife-wielding attacker turned and pointed his weapon at Ethan. "Sit down, old man, or you're first." Ethan's hands came up in a seemingly placating gesture. Okay, I'm not trying to be a hero. Just let the little girl over there leave first, then you can have whatever you want." His voice was reasonable, non-threatening, the kind of tone that made people think he was surrendering, but his body positioning was perfect, weight balanced, muscles coiled, watching both attackers with the kind of situational awareness that only comes from years of combat training. Then Ethan moved. His hand shot out faster than the attacker could track, grabbing the wrist holding the knife and twisting with precise force that made the weapon clatter to the floor. In the same motion, he pulled the man off balance and applied a chokehold that cut off blood flow to the brain, rendering him unconscious in seconds. The second attacker raised his gun, but Ethan was already pivoting, grabbing a chair and throwing it with devastating accuracy. The chair hit the gunman square in the chest, knocking him backward, and before he could recover, Ethan was on him, disarming him with moves that looked choreographed but were pure lethal efficiency. 6 seconds. That's how long it took for two armed men threatening an entire restaurant to end up unconscious on the floor, professionally subdued with minimum force but maximum effectiveness. The entire restaurant sat in absolute silence, nobody quite believing what they just witnessed. Lily stared at her father with eyes full of wonder. "Daddy, you're like a superhero." Ethan knelt down beside her, his hands still rock steady despite what had just happened. "No, baby. I just remembered how to do the right thing when people needed help." A waiter later told police. He didn't yell, didn't look scared, moved like he'd done this 1,000 times. After it was over, he just asked if everyone was okay, then sat back down to finish dinner with his daughter like nothing happened. The next day, cell phone footage of the incident went viral. Someone had been recording the dinner for social media when the attack happened, and the video clearly showed a middle-aged man in ordinary clothes taking down two armed attackers with movements that looked military precise. Within 24 hours, the video had millions of views and thousands of comments speculating about who this mysterious single dad really was. Is he a secret agent? The way he moves, that's definitely professional military training. Anyone know this guy's name? The internet did what it does best, trying to identify the hero while debating whether the video was real or staged. Ethan saw the headlines on his phone and immediately shut it off, telling Lily they needed to stay away from reporters. "I don't want to be famous, baby. I just want us to have a normal life." Clara Voss, the CEO who'd been in the restaurant that night, had no such hesitation. She tracked Ethan down through the restaurant's reservation system, showing up at the auto repair shop where he worked part-time to supplement his engineering income. "Mr. Cole, I'm Clara Voss. You saved my life the other night." Ethan looked up from the engine he'd been working on, his hands covered in grease. "You don't need to thank me, really. Anyone would have done the same thing." Clara smiled slightly. "No, they wouldn't have. Most people would have hidden under tables like I did. But I'm not here to thank you. I'm here to ask you something. You were Navy, weren't you?" Ethan's expression closed down immediately, the warmth leaving his eyes. "Who told you that?" Clara pulled out her tablet and showed him a screen full of research. "Nobody told me. I used to train security personnel, and nobody moves like you did without serious professional combat training. So I did some digging. Ethan Cole, United States Navy Special Warfare, discharged in 2019. Ethan set down his wrench and wiped his hands slowly, buying time to decide how to respond. "I just want a quiet life. That's why I left." Clara studied his face, seeing pain beneath the defensive posture. "Why did you leave? Men with your skills don't just walk away from the SEALs unless something major happens." Ethan's voice dropped. "Because I failed. A friend died because he trusted me to make the right call, and I didn't. I got people killed who shouldn't have died." The shop suddenly felt very small and quiet, the weight of old guilt pressing down between them. Clara's expression softened. "You didn't fail. The internet says you saved 34 people during your service, and 2 nights ago you saved an entire restaurant, including me. That's not failure." Ethan shook his head. "That was just instinct, muscle memory. It wasn't about being a hero." Clara took a step closer. "Then let me remind you of something. Heroes don't need titles or recognition to be heroes. They just need to show up when it matters." Ethan looked at this determined woman who'd tracked him down and refused to let him hide behind his carefully constructed, ordinary life. "Why does it matter to you? You don't know me." Clara's answer was simple. "Because I run a company that tries to protect people from digital threats, but you protect people in the most direct way possible. The world needs more people willing to do what you did, and they need to know that kind of courage exists in ordinary places." Over the next few days, Clara kept finding reasons to visit the shop, bringing coffee and conversation, slowly building a friendship with someone who'd forgotten how to let people get close. She told him about her company, about the cybersecurity threats she dealt with daily, about how she'd built her business from nothing and now employed over 200 people. Ethan found himself talking about Lily, about the challenges of raising a daughter alone, about trying to teach her to be brave without telling her about the violence he'd seen. One afternoon while they were talking, one of Ethan's coworkers wandered over, curious about the well-dressed woman who kept visiting their grease-stained shop. "Hey, Ethan, is this your girlfriend?" The question made both of them laugh awkwardly. Clara extended her hand. "Just a friend who owes him her life. He saved me from a very bad situation." The coworker's eyes went wide. "You're the lady from the restaurant video? The one with the crazy knife guy?" Clara nodded. "The same. Your friend here is quite remarkable." After the coworker left, Ethan sighed. "Everyone's going to want the story now. I was hoping this would just die down." Clara's expression turned serious. "Ethan, I have something to tell you. I'm organizing an event called Honoring Everyday Heroes, celebrating ordinary people who do extraordinary things. I want you to be the guest of honor." Ethan immediately shook his head. "No, absolutely not. I'm not a hero. I'm just a dad trying to raise his kid right." Clara had expected this response. "That's exactly why you should be there, because you don't think you're special. That's what makes your actions meaningful." A mechanic at the shop later said, "After that CEO lady left, I saw him staring at the sky for like 10 minutes, just thinking. First time I ever seen him look like maybe he was considering something instead of just saying no." 1 week later, Clara held a press conference to announce her Honoring Everyday Heroes initiative. She'd sent Ethan a personal invitation with 2 tickets, one for him and one for Lily, but he'd declined, sending a polite note that said he appreciated the gesture but wasn't comfortable with public recognition. Clara understood but was disappointed, believing his story could inspire countless people who felt powerless in dangerous situations. The event went forward without him, celebrating teachers who'd protected students during emergencies, bystanders who'd performed CPR to save lives, and ordinary citizens who demonstrated extraordinary courage. Clara gave the keynote speech, and near the end she spoke about the restaurant incident, describing how a single father had protected an entire room full of people, including children and elderly diners. She showed the viral video on the screen behind her, pointing out the precision and control in every movement, explaining how rare it was to see someone act so decisively without causing unnecessary harm. The next morning, Clara woke to news alerts on her phone showing her face and company name trending on social media, but not for good reasons. A crime syndicate she'd recently provided evidence against had issued public threats, stating that people who cooperated with law enforcement faced consequences. The messages were detailed enough that her security team took them seriously, arranging protection details and varying her travel routes. But Clara refused to hide, refused to let criminals dictate her life through fear. She was leaving her office building that evening, flanked by 2 security guards, when Ethan's truck suddenly screeched around the corner and stopped directly between her and a suspicious vehicle that had been trailing her for 3 blocks. 2 men jumped out of the suspicious vehicle with weapons drawn, but Ethan was already moving, positioning himself as a physical barrier while yelling for Clara and her guards to get inside. The confrontation lasted less than a minute before police units that Ethan had called earlier arrived and arrested the would-be attackers. Clara stood in the lobby of her building, hands shaking from adrenaline, staring at Ethan, who looked completely calm, despite having just prevented another violent incident. "You saved me again. How did you even know I was in danger?" Ethan's answer was matter of fact. "I've been watching your building since I saw the threats online, recognized the surveillance pattern they were running, same tactics used in hostile territories overseas, called it in and made sure I was here just in case." Clara's voice broke slightly. "You've been protecting me for days without telling me?" Ethan shrugged. "Old habits. Can't really turn off that part of my brain that identifies threats and responds to them. She looked at this man who kept insisting he wasn't a hero while repeatedly acting like one. The Navy training never really leaves, does it? He finally admitted what she'd already figured out. No. Once a SEAL, you're always thinking tactically, always scanning for danger, always ready to move. It's both a skill and a curse. The next day, Clara made a decision that she knew Ethan would hate, but felt was necessary. She held a press conference and publicly revealed his identity, not just as the restaurant hero, but as a decorated former Navy SEAL who'd saved 34 lives during a ship rescue operation in 2016. She showed his service record with his permission, which she'd obtained by explaining that his story could inspire an entire generation to believe in the possibility of everyday heroism. The conference room was packed with reporters and cameras. The humble man you've seen in the viral video is Ethan Cole, a former Navy SEAL who chose to leave military service to raise his daughter as a single father. Today he saved me again from a coordinated attack, the second time he's put himself at risk to protect others. He did all this while asking for nothing, expecting nothing, wanting only to be left alone. But we can't leave heroes alone when their example is exactly what our society needs. Ethan watched the press conference from his small apartment, Lily beside him on the couch. When Clara finished speaking and the audience gave a standing ovation, Lily looked up at her father with tears in her eyes. "Daddy, you really are a hero. Why didn't you tell me?" Ethan pulled his daughter close. "Because being a hero isn't about the title, baby. It's about doing what's right when someone needs help. That's something everyone can do, not just people with special training. I didn't want you to think courage was something only soldiers had." The reaction was overwhelming. National news picked up the story. Veteran organizations reached out with job offers and speaking opportunities, and Ethan's phone rang constantly with interview requests that he declined one after another. He agreed to exactly one interview, a local news segment where he could control the message. When asked why he'd intervened both times, his answer was simple and direct. "I'm a father first, but I'm also someone who is trained to protect people, and I can't turn that off just because I'm not wearing a uniform anymore. Anyone in that restaurant could have been someone's daughter, someone's mother. How could I live with myself if I had the ability to help and chose not to?" That quote became the most shared clip from the interview, resonating with people tired of the bystander effect, tired of watching violence happen while everyone pulls out their phones instead of intervening. Ethan's story sparked a national conversation about personal responsibility, about the training ordinary citizens should have, about creating a culture where people looked out for each other instead of assuming someone else would handle problems. Clara visited Ethan at his apartment a few days after the press conference, nervous about how he'd react to her having exposed his identity despite knowing he valued privacy. "Are you angry with me?" she asked. Ethan considered the question seriously before answering. "I was at first, but Lily told me something that changed my mind. She said that now all her friends at school think their parents could be heroes too, and they're being nicer to each other because of it. If your press conference did that, if it made people believe they could be brave, then maybe it was worth it." A reporter who covered the story said, "When he spoke about his daughter being proud, he didn't look at the cameras. He looked at her sitting in the front row and she was crying. That's when everyone in the room understood this wasn't about him wanting glory. It was about teaching his kid what real courage looks like." Following the media attention, people started showing up at the auto repair shop where Ethan worked, asking if he could teach them basic self-defense. At first, he tried to redirect them to professional martial arts schools or police-sponsored safety courses, but they persisted, specifically wanting to learn from someone who'd used these skills in real situations. After a dozen requests, Ethan finally agreed to teach one free weekend class in a local community center gym. 30 people showed up for that first class, ranging from teenagers to elderly residents who'd felt increasingly unsafe in their neighborhoods. Ethan taught them not complicated martial arts moves, but simple, effective techniques for creating distance from attackers, protecting vital areas, and escaping dangerous situations. The goal is never to fight, he emphasized repeatedly. The goal is to survive and get away. Leave the heroics to professionals or people with no other choice. But what made Ethan's teaching effective wasn't just the physical techniques, it was the mindset he instilled. Fear is normal and useful, he told his students, but panic gets you hurt or killed. We're going to practice staying calm when your heart is racing, making decisions when your brain wants to freeze, acting when everything in you wants to run and hide. That's the real skill I'm teaching. He had them practice techniques while he yelled and created chaos, simulating the confusion and terror of actual violence. Clara attended every class, at first to show support, but increasingly because she found the training valuable for her own life. She'd built a successful company, but realized she'd never felt physically capable of protecting herself until now. After one particularly intense session, she approached Ethan. You know you've basically started a movement here, right? People from 3 different neighborhoods are attending now. Ethan looked at the diverse group of students helping each other practice. I just wanted to give people tools to feel safer. You're doing more than that, Clara insisted. You're changing how this community thinks about personal responsibility and looking out for each other. Half these students have started neighborhood watch groups. Crime reports are down in the areas where your students live. You've created ripples. Ethan was quiet for a moment, watching an elderly woman successfully execute a wrist release technique on a younger student. Maybe that's what I was supposed to do after leaving the Navy. Not fight wars, but teach people they don't have to be victims. The classes continued to grow, and Clara made a proposal. Let me fund a proper training facility, not just for self-defense, but for community building, teaching people skills that make them more confident and capable. We could call it the Ward Community Defense Center. Ethan raised an eyebrow at the name. Ward? Like Life Ward? Clara smiled. Exactly. A place that wards off harm by making people stronger. Ethan agreed on one condition, that the center would offer free or sliding scale classes so economics would never prevent someone from learning these skills. 6 months later, the center opened in a renovated warehouse, offering not just self-defense but first aid, emergency preparedness, and community organizing courses. Lily cut the ribbon at the opening ceremony, beaming with pride as her father stood beside her. My daddy teaches people to be strong like him, she announced to the gathered crowd. Ethan corrected her gently. No, baby. I teach people they were always strong. They just needed to remember it. Clara stood nearby, watching the community celebrate this new resource, and felt a surge of gratitude for the day 2 criminals had attacked a restaurant and revealed what extraordinary courage looked like in an ordinary person. She walked over to Ethan during a quiet moment. You've saved me twice now. Maybe it's time I help you save yourself. Ethan looked confused. What do you mean? Clara took a breath. You left the Navy carrying guilt about people you lost. But look around. Look at all these people who are safer, stronger, more confident because of you. You're still saving lives, just in a different way. Maybe it's time to forgive yourself and recognize that your mission didn't end. It just changed. If you believe kindness and courage change communities, comment respect. 1 year after the restaurant incident, the Ward Community Defense Center held its first anniversary celebration. Over 500 people had gone through their programs, and testimonials poured in from students whose lives had been changed. A single mother wrote about how the training helped her feel safe, walking to work at night. A teenager described standing up to bullies for the first time after learning he had the skills to protect himself without violence. An elderly man thanked Ethan for teaching him that age didn't mean helplessness. Ethan stood on the small stage they'd erected for the celebration, looking uncomfortable with the attention as always, but Clara had convinced him that the students needed to see him acknowledge their progress. 1 year ago, I was just trying to have a nice dinner with my daughter, he began, his voice carrying across the crowd. I didn't plan to become a teacher or start a movement. I just reacted to danger the way I was trained to react. But what all of you have taught me this year is that everyone has the capacity for courage. You don't need military training or a heroic moment. You just need to decide that you won't be a bystander when someone needs help. Lily sat in the front row next to Clara, both of them watching Ethan with obvious affection. The little girl who'd once been terrified in a restaurant now helped teach the younger kids self-defense classes, showing them basic techniques with the confidence of someone who'd grown up around capable people. Clara had become much more than a funding source. She'd become deeply involved in every aspect of the center's operations, using her business skills to create sustainable programs and partnerships. After the speeches ended and the celebration moved to demonstrations and refreshments, Clara found Ethan standing alone on the outdoor training mat, looking at the sunset. "You did good today," she said quietly, standing beside him. "These people believe in themselves because you believed in them first." Ethan smiled slightly. "I just showed them they were already capable. The courage was always there." Clara took his hand, a gesture that had become natural over the months of working together. "Can I tell you something? When you saved me that first night, I thought I was just lucky you were there. Now I realize everyone should be that lucky, to have someone who will step up when things go wrong. That's what you've created here." Ethan looked at their joined hands, then at Clara's face. "You know, when I left the Navy, I thought my life of service was over. I thought I'd just be a dad and a regular worker, and that would be enough. But you showed me I could keep serving, just in a different way. You gave me purpose again." Clara's eyes were bright with emotion. "So we saved each other then. That seems fair." They stood together watching the last rays of sunlight paint the training center in warm gold, listening to the sounds of their students and community members celebrating nearby. The final image showed the center's mission statement painted on the wall in letters large enough to read from across the courtyard. "Courage begins with kindness." Below it was a photo from the restaurant incident next to a photo from the center's opening day, showing how one moment of instinctive heroism had grown into something that strengthened an entire community. Ethan had learned that leaving the military didn't mean leaving behind the values he'd lived by. It just meant applying them in new ways, teaching others that protection and service weren't jobs reserved for professionals, but responsibilities everyone could embrace. If you believe stories like this deserve to be shared and remembered, leave a comment and subscribe. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.